Thousands of children and families in Marion County struggle with issues like poverty, substance abuse, or mental and emotional illness. Many local services exist to help families in crisis, but families often don't know about these services or can't get to them. Unmet needs can result in child abuse, neglect, or juvenile delinquency. The Early Intervention Planning Council, through the Marion County Commission on Youth's Early Intervention and Prevention Initiative, has created a plan to give families earlier access to services in the hopes of reducing the number of children who get abused or neglected or turn to delinquent acts. We hope you enjoy our monthly program, Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities, and learn more about the local services here to help you.
Hi, I'm Shana Martin, Director of the EIP Initiative at McCoy. Thank you for joining us and tuning in for another episode of Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities. As always, this show is going to be very informative about a topic that is very interesting to me in particular, but a lot of service providers and families in the community. And it's all about adverse childhood experiences. So talking about things that we all experience as children and how some of those things that are negative can then have an impact on our health, our social skills and challenges, our ability to relate to others and to make good decisions, and how that really impacts us kind of throughout the life course. So I have two experts from our community, Katie from Midtown Mental Health and Amy from IPS Roots Program, and I'll give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about more about who they are and the work that they do every day in our community. Katie?
Yeah, I'm Katie Fieser, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a therapist at Midtown in our child and adolescent outpatient program. I've been there for 6 years, and Midtown Children's programming focuses on children really from infancy or toddlerhood through their late teens, even up to age 20. And we provide outpatient services that are therapy focused and care coordination focused for youth.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm. I'm Amy Anderson. I'm the coordinator of the Roots Program, which is an IPS day treatment program for kids with significant mental health and or behavior challenges. Roots stands for Reclaiming Our Opportunities to Succeed, and it is basically a very small school that meets the needs of kids who are really struggling in their current school setting. It's therapeutic setting, trauma-informed, and meets the needs of kids who haven't been successful in other settings.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both for being here. So let's talk about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs is what a lot of us refer to that. What is that?
You want me to say it? Adverse childhood experiences. This is a screening instrument that is a 10-question screen, and it focuses on 5 different types of childhood abuse or neglect that can be experienced. It also focuses on 5 types of in-home kind of family stressful situations that can happen in your home. And the goal of the ACE instrument is that you are going to be looking for what kind of stressful or traumatic experiences has a child encountered. We know that there are lasting changes, lasting health changes and brain changes that occur after a child has been exposed to a big stressor. And so the ACE instrument is meant to be a way that we try to just pull out what has happened to this child and then determine maybe some ways we can start to help them with those needs.
Often the ACE questionnaire is used for adults, and so what we have found in the Roots program is it's most beneficial for us to use with our parents of children because so often the parents of the children that we have who are having all kinds of emotional and behavior challenges have also, as children, had all kinds of trauma, abuse, neglect, horrible situations that they've had to survive, which then impacts their ability to raise children who are healthy and well-balanced.
Okay. And the ACE, adverse childhood experiences, came out of a study that was done in the 1990s, I believe, out in California,
Yes.
In partnership with the CDC and the Kaiser Permanente Health
Yes.
Clinic, where
Yes.
they were kind of trying to look at social factors that impacted health.
Absolutely.
And they surveyed like 17,000 people, I think, that were primarily Caucasian, middle income folks that they discovered had childhood experiences that were traumatic. Things like exposure to domestic violence or sexual abuse or a parent that was incarcerated, or I'm kind of going through those 10 questions. And
divorced or separated.
Yep.
And those are a lot of the family
Addictions.
ones.
Addiction, family, a parent with
Yeah.
substance abuse or a mental health issue.
Or a suicide attempt in your home.
Okay.
Periods of time where your basic needs aren't met, lack of food, lack of shelter, lack of those kind of.
And then they found by doing that the more ACEs you had, the more adverse childhood experiences, that it actually was decreasing lifespans because folks then were engaging in behaviors that were not good and increased rates of high blood pressure, heart attacks, other diseases, but then also addiction rates and suicide attempts and stuff were kind of directly linked to a lot of those experiences. So very interesting.
Yeah. And I'm not sure I'm going to get the numbers right, but I think they found that 50% of those 17,000 had 3 or more.
I believe you're
I mean, it was
right.
an outrageous number of people who have suffered in some way, and it impacts their ability to be successful and to live long, prosperous lives.
And I highlighted that they were middle income,
Right.
Caucasian people, simply because I think there's sometimes this perception that there are a certain class of folks or certain race of people that are impacted, and otherwise the rest of us are all fine, and that's not the case. Any family, any household, we just named off some of those. A divorce, which is very common in our community, and that can have a really bad impact and negatively affect children, which then you see in school, their behavior, their choices, domestic violence in homes, which has no race or class perspective, that then impacts, relationships later on and the choices that those children make. So
Absolutely.
So how do we, aside from doing the questionnaire, how do you identify or start to think, well, maybe there's something else going on or some history that we need to get some answers to even be able to administer that?
I think in schools, we have to develop habits that include looking deeper than just the surface. And unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure on schools to become just factories where we just produce children who can take tests. And I think it's our priority and our obligation to first meet the needs of children, just their basic needs of children. And so I think it's rather simple, actually. And I think it means that you have to get to know children, you have to listen to them, you have to watch their affect, you have to pay attention to shutting down, acting out, their ability to build and maintain positive relationships in schools with adults and peers. Though all of those things are signs that this child may be struggling, and this child may have experiences that are getting in the way of them being successful in school.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. I agree with everything. We see that too, and I think I agree that the changes that will start to happen, we can see it across so many different levels. We can see a child begin to have big eating changes. They're eating less, they're eating more. Their sleep is starting to get more restless or disrupted. Behaviorally, they will start to oftentimes have acting out behaviors, or their focus has been very diminished, because we know that brain response is that they have developed a heightened sense of fear and fight or flight response. And so when your brain goes into a high alert mode way more often, it is going to impair your ability to regulate your emotions, and it's going to impair your ability to really regulate your behaviors. And that's when a lot of times, at least at Midtown, we get parents bringing in their children, or foster parents bringing in kids, saying, this child is really acting out, or they're not sleeping through the night, or they're eating in the middle of the night, we don't know why. School's not going as well as it once was. So there are mood changes, and obviously school changes, and sometimes grades have declined. Sometimes you're hearing about more suspensions or risk of expulsion, because the kiddo just is struggling so much to maintain themselves and contain themselves while they're at school. They're feeling triggered, or they can't take their mind off of different stressors that have occurred. And we know that about stress too, that it will kind of pop back up in our brain at different times and in different ways. And there are these reminders that just can set us off. It could be, the color of someone's shirt, or the way that the sound of the teacher's voice, or missing our mom who we know is incarcerated because we are now in foster care. So there's so many reasons that kids just have these signs, and you're absolutely right. We just have to listen and pay attention.
So when you, Amy, because you specifically referenced doing the ACE with parents, so when you do that, what's the response you get from parents if they discover that or recognize that they've had adverse childhood experiences, and because of that it's probably impacting their life in negative ways, but also maybe impacting how they're parenting their kids or the environment that their kids are in?
Right. We've kind of backstepped into our parenting work in terms of the Roots program. So initially, we tried to just meet the needs of kids. Like our 8-hour school day, we tried to meet the needs of kids. And we have a child psychiatrist who comes, once a week to do our med management and support the therapists. And so he would spend time with the adults. And in conversations, pick up on some of the stuff that was going on in the home. Or parents, once you've built a trusting relationship, many parents feel very comfortable talking about previous abuse, previous situations, because it's helpful to talk about it, particularly if you're spending time with someone you trust. And so over time, we have shifted more attention and more energy on sort of meeting the needs of our adults, the parents of our children. And so with that, we have hired an adult therapist whose focus is the adults. And after she's developed a relationship with them, then she uses the ACE. And I think it's for us, because we're a school setting, it's critical for us to focus on the child, and then the parenting, family rearing, and then when we've developed a relationship, then focus on the adult. But I will tell you that the adults that we have done really important, deep work with are very comfortable having those conversations and very comfortable working on their issues. Because parents, the worst deadbeat parents I've ever met love their children. Yep. They want to be good at this thing called being a mom or being a dad. But they only do and can do what they've been taught, and many of them have been taught wrong. And so I think that I think ACEs is a good way to begin that conversation, and then we have to surround them with good information, good modeling, gentle ideas, things, small steps that they can take in their own house to become better at this very, very difficult job of parenting.
Which some of that means addressing their own trauma and their own experiences, which, we talked about this a little bit out in the hallway, that when you don't, then you parent that same way, and then your children parent that same way. And so then you have generations of families that have experienced trauma. We talk about that a lot, and we've done some episodes around sexual abuse where, it's like everybody in the family knows that there's that one uncle who's done this, to everyone, but it's never dealt with. But you've got kids that are then experiencing this and going to school or out in the community, and they're acting this out. I work for the Department of Corrections, and it was heartbreaking to have kids that were locked up for being sexual offenders when they're talking to me about the trauma that they experienced and the fact that they were sexually assaulted as children, repeatedly by family members, by friends, and it's and then it's well, no wonder they then did the same thing, because
the message sent to them was, that is how you love.
Yes.
That is how you love.
And everybody knows.
That's how you get attention. That's how you give attention.
Yeah. So what about your work? Do you guys do work with adults as well?
We do some work with adults. We have learned that incorporating a parent into this process is very, very important to really elicit what their perspectives are and what their experiences have been. So as you guys are doing the ACE screen with parents, I think that is a wonderful idea, which I'd like to think more about how we can use that at Midtown. We do some other assessments with parents to try to gather some of their life stress or experiences that they've had. But also, I think once that relationship has been starting to have been built with the child and with the family, it is a great time to ask parents if they've had traumas themselves, if they've had adverse events, because some of them have said, this is the one thing I don't know how to talk to my kid about, and it was the one thing I had happen and no one ever dealt with me about. And I've had parents give me so many examples of ways that even if their child does something in a way that concerns them, later their child does something that's just a natural childlike thing to do, and it makes the parent uncomfortable if the parent has had traumatic stress. For example, if a parent has had sexual abuse or physical abuse, they may be uncomfortable having their child sleep next to them if their child is clinging and wants to sleep next to them. And that might remind them of a time that they didn't feel like their body was safe. So there are so many things that we have to take into account with how parents are parenting. And as Amy said, how they are either doing things in a way they've learned or doing things against the way they've learned. And a lot of times they need us to help open that door of what have you learned and what have you experienced and what was that like for you and what is it like for your child now? What do they need from you, do you think? We can go back to, well, what do you think you needed? And then we can kind of tailor that to, well, what does your child need now? And we've learned that the more we involve parents and get information on them, the more we feel like we are being comprehensive and just, I think, wrapping around the family to really build the bridge of how we're going to help treat the family and not just the child. Yeah.
How does the ACE, an adverse childhood experience, is it just one event, or is it a series of events, or is it based on living in an environment that has, this stuff going on? Can you guys talk a little bit more about that, or a combination of both of them?
I think, well, in my experience with kids, sometimes it's one event, but I would say that in most circumstances it's a series of events. And some of that is because, I think because traumatic experiences lead to other traumatic experiences. So you are raised in a house where your father, as a child, you were raised in a house where your father was physically and verbally abusive to your mother on a regular basis. Your mother then starts abusing painkillers as a way of surviving this miserable husband. She then fails to take care of her children, which leads to separation or divorce, joblessness. I mean, they pile up on each other. There's a really great children's book called The Quarreling Book, and I think it was published in like 1960, but it tells a children's version of the story. And the story starts out where the little boy, or the dad doesn't say goodbye to the mom because he's frustrated that it's raining out and whatever. And as the story goes on, one thing leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to another, and then at the very end of the story, the little boy in the house is really mean to the dog because his mom has been mean to him and his dad is and the little boy, the dog, instead of biting the little boy or running away from the little boy, pushes him down on the ground and starts licking his face. So that makes the little boy laugh. So then he goes out and he gives his mom a hug, and then his mom, and that's the power of good things and the power of bad things. And that's why so often with these children, or these families, it's a series. One thing leads to another, and pretty soon nothing's functioning very well in that house. And so they're living in a traumatic environment that repeats itself over and over and over, and that impacts your ability to be healthy. It affects your brain.
And just as that story portrays, is how the ways that people start to cope then, outside of the symptoms we'll see, the signs we'll see in little children up through adolescence, through adulthood, there are ways that they typically will try to cope that are the most quick and soothing way, and that is when we see smoking or drug use or alcohol use or promiscuity or running away from home. The list goes on, and those are just what create more risk factors for then the chronic illnesses and health problems that, like you mentioned earlier, Shayna.
They pile on each other.
Yeah. Yeah, we were having a conversation with some detention center probation folks. You know, one of the things, they were seeing an increase in females that were running away and coming to the detention center. But what the comment was that we can't get them home and to stay home long enough to get services in place, because as soon as they go back home, then they're running again. And so it was kind of like, well, are we figuring out what they're running from? And why? Because clearly there's something then that's going on at home that is not safe for them.
Right.
You know, kids don't just wake up one day and decide they're going to run away from home. There's usually a reason, because they feel unsafe. There's something going on in the home that's not good for them, that's not healthy. So, you know, trying to get services in place for them to have is wonderful, but maybe having them in that home environment is not the best way to do that.
Right.
So, but it's just a lot. It's very complex. There's a lot to it. Our systems are, you know, are constrained and by lots of stuff, laws and policies and funding, and so it's how do you put all these pieces together and make it work so that you know, kids are always at the heart of everything, but it's sometimes it's such a challenge, and I give you guys credit for being able to do you know what you do, but addressing the root causes, which we talk about, is always the most important, because I think we've functioned in a society where we want to fix this and fix that and slap a Band-Aid on that without ever addressing that. You know, let's go back to when you were 1 and 2, you know, what was happening then, because that probably tells a lot about why you're doing the things you are at 25, and 26, and 35, and 45, if nothing's ever been addressed.
Absolutely.
So how many so are you seeing success when you're working with parents in what we would call a trauma-informed way, that you're recognizing that kids and parents have been traumatized, have had these experiences, and so looking at it from that perspective, from what has happened to you, instead of, you know, what's wrong with you and why are you acting like this every day? Are you seeing success in doing things?
And I'll say, I think we are seeing success. I think what is so important is that we, as a community, help families realize what sources, services, resources are out there. You know, I'm working in my area, which is mental health. And so if children can come and families can come together and get some really good mental health treatment, we will delve into this trauma stuff, and we will work on these symptoms, and we will link for these children how what has happened has impacted what they thought and how they felt in the moment, and now what they're doing because of that with their body, how their mind is, how they're, you know, all of these symptoms and signs we see. And then fourthly, what they need. And we go through that almost diamond over and over and over, and we tailor things to make that be how they are getting more of their needs met. And I think what so often happens is if they're living in an environment that is still stressful and chaotic or has trauma risks going on, it's going to be really hard for us to see success. If they're out of an environment where those things are happening, they can start to feel safe, and they will be able to process some of these things that have happened. Aside from just the mental health component, we do need them to have extra resources and, you know, positive role models, positive adults who will listen, a parent who can listen and say, tell me this story, tell me what it was like for you. You know, this is how I felt about it, how have you been feeling about it? Opening the door, allowing children to ventilate out what it was like, because we have some taboos and we have some secrets in families, or there's unspoken rules of we don't talk about it. So having more positive conversations, positive role models, and then just activities that kids can do to start to rebuild their resiliency, those are so important.
I would say at the Roots program, we're having ridiculous amounts of success. And I think that our success has come because we have been given permission to first focus on the elephant in the room, which is the trauma. It's hard for schools to do that anymore, because schools are under so much pressure to do other things. But I think it's absolutely critical that is the initial focus. And sometimes that initial focus, you know, is a mere few days. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months for some kids. But they can't learn until they feel safe and secure and able to focus on learning. So I think that our success comes in the freedom and ability to first focus on them as little kids. And we do that in lots of ways. And then we've gotten really creative with how we educate too. So we have tried really hard to sort of fit in positive pro-social behaviors every chance we get. I have this incredible group of adults who just work their tails off, and they smile at the beginning of every day, and they're still smiling at the end of every day, and they are great role models, and they teach kids how and when to respond. They teach coping skills, they model coping skills. We sort of stick in good literature that teaches kids about anger and frustration and abuse and divorce and all that jazz. Stick it in there every chance we get. And we focus on building healthy communities within classrooms, where it's safe to share what hurts you, and it's safe to share what scares you, and it's safe to share where you've been and where you want to be. And then I think that sort of bleeds over into the adults, and then we work on that.
Okay.
I will say that our biggest challenge is changing the day-to-day runnings within homes. I think that's our biggest challenge. I think we make baby steps on that, but one of my goals is to do a better job at providing parents with more information about the impact of all of this on children. And I think there's much to be learned, but I think that television is traumatizing children. The research doesn't say that, but I think that's my research. So I think we have to teach parents about that. The impact of playing video games where you're killing people. That messes with your brain.
Yeah, with no consequences.
Eating your after-school snack with Jerry Springer in the background. That messes with your brain. It's not healthy. So it's big. Our responsibilities are big, but we're making huge strides. But the work's not done.
It's not done. And I think building parents' hope, I'm trying to say, that it can get better, and that there will be a change. And if they get on the wagon and they stick out the ride, we will get there. It will take time. And we always kind of try to let parents know you're not going to see immediate results coming here, but we're going to work as actively as we can together. And if you can have a parent meet with you as frequently as you're having the child meet with you, or as outside of those family therapy sessions, we're seeing that parents, the light bulbs continue to go off of their own needs, what they ought to be doing now to kind of get their needs better taken care of, and how that will then extend down to how their children's success and progress comes. So I think we really have to help build these families' optimism that let's talk about it because it can get better from here.
Because it didn't happen overnight, so it's not going to get better overnight. It took months and months or even years to get here. So you have to think it's going to take an equal amount of time for things to totally improve. Not that there won't be steps along the way, but again, it's not like, oh, magic, and my kid's going to, now suddenly be able to stay in his seat every day at school for 8 hours. Yeah, probably not going to happen for a while. But maybe 10 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time, 20 minutes at a time is better than nothing. So, and just recognizing, I think what you guys have pointed out, and the whole adverse childhood experience study, is that there are many, many, many hundreds and thousands and millions of people that have experienced adverse childhood experiences. Certainly there are not people that are suffering this alone that have not had adverse childhood experiences. I took the quiz, my score was not 0. So I think it was very interesting and telling to think about this, and then think about how these things or the adverse childhood experiences that I had have impacted me in some way or another. It really just kind of makes you really think,
does,
but it just and knowing that I've had a pretty good life, it just makes you think of the significance of a few events on you, and the fact that, like I said, we're all experiencing this. So hopefully my guests will take that from this, is that, ask the questions, go find the help, because it's better for your whole family, that as adults, then we don't continue to traumatize children
Right.
repeatedly, and that they don't go on to be traumatizers as well, which nobody
Right.
wants that for their kids. So,
Absolutely.
Katie and Amy, thank you very much for being here today. Really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the great information that you shared. So,
Thank you.
and thank you for
Thank
tuning
you.
in to another episode of Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.